So my name's Kevin Flaherty, and I'm with the Alberta Workers Health Centre. And I guess my story, to start it off in a very short way, is I've had the pleasure of working there since 1995. And the story isn't really mine, it's the story of the health centre, which I think is not one of the stories we're going to be hearing about today. But I think it's a historic success of workers and unions in this province and this country. It's supporting a worker-run, worker-funded health and safety program for all workers. It's not just for union workers. And I don't know if the founders who worked so hard to get it rolling in the 80s were going to be aware of its longevity, but I think it's a tremendous achievement, not only keeping my family fed, because I've been there since '95, but just in terms of the work that we've hopefully been able to accomplish on behalf of workers in the province, and because of the support of the union movement in this province. And so thank you for all your support financially, for your guidance, because our board of directors is from unions, and that's something that most nonprofit organizations cannot really talk about. Anyway, thanks so much. So this is, for those of you who, it looks like most of you are from Alberta. Is anyone not from Alberta? Yeah! Comrade Dave Coles and Terry Weber, who used to be from Alberta. But anyway, I'm just going to start with a couple of observations to set the context for health and safety in Alberta. Just really very, very simply. It's somewhat unique, I think. I'm always talking to people from outside the province. And the struggle for health and safety isn't very institutionalized in the same way that some places have, with mandatory legislation providing for mandatory joint committees. And the structure of the struggle then tends to take on the characteristics of those types of committees in those places, or at least the official struggle, right? Enforcement in this province is seriously underwhelming, and the jury is still out as to the effectiveness of the levels of prosecution. I think it's, in terms of providing a jury, in my mind, it's not strong enough, but there's no real way of measuring that right now. Statistics historically around health and safety are woefully inadequate for actually measuring whether something's working or not. And so we have to listen even more closely to the stories of workers who tell tales of horrendous working conditions, even yet in 2012 in this province and around the country. So there's a complex kind of a matrix, I guess, of places where health and safety gets fought and won and lost in this province, and it takes different places, different forms, different ways. We also characterize health and safety in the province as not having a government that really cares about what workers have to say, organized or unorganized. And so when I hear stories from other provinces where the labor movement has got, for the most part, the labor movement has some kind of relationship either with a relatively strong opposition or even the government party, and there's some form of influence takes place there. Some of those issues, some of those ways, some present company excluded in terms of success stories, those success stories here tend to be further apart and harder to achieve. But this is about workers' stories of the struggle, and it's not that we've been unsuccessful. I think it's just sometimes the success, if you looked only at the legislation and the official history, the successes are harder to acknowledge and harder to recognize. And that's why this type of this story session is even more important for me. It gives us a chance to put out there some of those issues that we've been dealing with. So success comes in many forms, as does the format of the struggle here in Alberta. I think single job actions. It takes place behind closed doors, which is probably common in most provinces, but it's a sad part of our struggle that working conditions are still sort of almost back in at Stone Ages, where we don't talk about them. We're not allowed to talk in public about what happens behind closed doors. But so the struggle takes place in single job actions, and sometimes actions of individual workers. Sort of, sometimes we call it cowboy stuff. I think it's workers fighting for what they see as important, maybe with others on their side, and sometimes alone. Sometimes that strikes, legal and illegal, fighting to negotiate changes to working conditions through changes in their collective agreement, pushes for legislative change through the influence on advisory groups or whatever the government throws up there as a way to supposedly get feedback from workers on what should happen. And through political parties and political support and changes in the legislature. And also, I think, through alliances in the rest of civil society to raise issues of common concern. And getting secondhand smoke out of workplaces is a good example of that. So I think workers in this province may not be more creative than workers in other provinces, but I think we are creative in how we approach these things. And maybe that's sort of a bit of a small context for how health and safety is done in this province. It's very, very uneven, as I say, and a tribute to the folks in the room and outside who work day to day to make those working conditions better. It's not easy. It's not easy. So I'm really honored to have 5 other people with me, and I'll just quickly introduce them. They're going to each take 5 minutes. That's the laugh. That's the official line is we're each going to take 5. And then I'm calling them the first storytellers, because if we get through these folks and we have time left, then the floor is open to you folks to add your own stories to this. Okay. On my right is Brad Hoekstra from Edmonton Firefighters Association. My immediate right is Eric Rosenthal from CEP out in Hinton. Dennis Malayko is a long-suffering health and safety advocate for the AUPE, Alberta Union Provincial Employees in Edmonton. And Bob Zorniak was gracing the floor of the Workers' Health Center when I showed up there in '95. And I'm really happy to have him back here. He was with the United Steelworkers out in Stelco. What was Stelco? The steel mill outside Edmonton. And Janice Peterson works now. She was my immediate predecessor at the Workers' Health Center, but before that was a health and safety activist and nurse, and is now with the University of Alberta.
I picked a real fun campaign I had. It was called, and I'll give you some basically what happened prior to the campaign being launched. Mid-1980s to late 80s, our members were filing many complaints related to indoor air quality in closed concept buildings. In other words, buildings that were did not bring on fresh air. They recirculated used air, and they would shut down buildings at 5 o'clock if that was the type of operation, and shut them down for the weekends to conserve energy. We were getting complaints of burning eyes, sore throats, headaches, lethargy, real tiredness, because they're basically not getting fresh air during the day, and respiratory problems, as well as their sick rates were up. You know, the absenteeism was very high. And many of these buildings not only, and you couldn't open windows in these buildings, and many of them contained underground parkades where the employer responded in their usual fashion. Let's blame the victim here. And they really launched into what I call, they call it the attendance enhancement program. We call it the attendance harassment program. Basically, it's a way of, and they went after the victims of the issues at the workplace. In other words, don't deal with the issues, blame the victims. So what a attendance harassment program is basically you're coached and you're pressured into showing up for work. And if you don't show up for work, they can dismiss you. They can terminate your employment on non-culpable or innocent absenteeism grounds. You can have all the medical certificates on earth to support you, but the arbitrators usually rule that you were not showing up for the job you contracted to do with the employer. So our members were being terminated. So I'm thinking, I chatted with all my buddies, and I had a dream one night. I said, we gotta challenge this bullshit. We gotta challenge it somehow. And I came up with what I call the Sick Building of the Year campaign. So in other words, we developed a survey that we advertised in our impact at that time. And I got full support of the AEP executive and the AEP Health and Safety Committee. And we put in and this is where my prop comes in.
Hold that for you?
Yeah.
Love this
So
chapter.
basically, this is the cartoon that we commissioned. It shows a sick building, and the media are really attracted to this. They jumped on board with it. Can you see the cartoon? You can look at it after. It's basically a sick building with it, and it's got people hanging out of it. It's very typical. And we also, as part of our impact article, we asked our members a number of questions, and they had to respond to it, and we asked them to nominate their building for Sick Building of the Year. And we presented the award. We had 100 buildings throughout the province that were nominated. And the award, I made up an award that was a trophy that really hacked and coughed. And we did the 10 top worst buildings in the province at our convention, and Edmonton Remand Centre came out on top. Unfortunately, nobody came from the Remand Centre to accept the award. So what I did is, Winston Gerlich helped me at that time. He was our communications guy. We did a big media blitz. And I took the trophy to the Remand Centre, and I basically tried to gain entry to present it to the director of the facility. At that time, they had 700 inmates in the Remand Centre, which was designed for 350. They now have up to 850 inmates in that facility. That's why they're moving to the new one where they're going to have 2,000 inmates. But they were all, most of them were smokers. Our members were working in control centers under negative pressure. They weren't getting fresh air, so all the smoke was being sucked into their control centers. Many of them were getting asthmas, real severe symptoms. So we had claims filed, and we continued to lobby. But the Edmonton Journal put me on the front page with the trophy presentation. Not long after that, I got contacted by CBC National News to participate in an indoor air quality forum at the Citadel Theatre. My favorite media person, Barbara Frum, was the moderator. And Herb Buckwall, many of you remember him, he was on the panel with me, and I can't remember the engineer, but I really tore him up at the session. Because they were using standards for the office environment, for the building environment that applied to industry, like 5,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide. It is safe. They're throwing that back at me, okay? So I just got to check my notes because I got a certain flow to this. Flow fast.
All out of a dream.
Yeah, right.
Gotta be past 6 by now.
So not long after that, I was approved by we embarrassed the government on this one. I was approved by the Edmonton Remand Centre, who was booting me out of there. Everyone else is trying to get out. I'm trying to get in. And they approached me and said, Dennis, how can we work together? I said, we need an indoor air quality study. And so they allowed me to supervise sampling every 2 weeks during each season of the year, and I supervised it. And we had carbon dioxide up to 4,000 parts per million in certain parts of the area. No wonder the inmates were gasping like chickens in a coop. And we also had garbage trucks that would come into the building, and they would exhaust their diesel, and you could smell it throughout the building because it's a closed concept. Whenever somebody put Drano in a toilet, you could smell the fumes throughout the building. People were really getting sick in that building. So after a year of study, everything validated my concerns that I've been presenting to the ERC for almost 10 years. So as a consequence of this action, $10 million were spent on changing the whole system to bring fresh air onto the units, and we noticed the absenteeism rate dropped significantly in our buildings. So
very directional, so the minute they get off them,
what did this, oh, and also they dropped the attendance enhancement
I
program
think it's distorting.
and put in place ESRA, which is called the Employee Support and Recovery Assistance. I'm saying it's not our employees that are ill, it's your building that's sick. Serious sick building.
If you got a pair of
So
phones to
we put in
monitor.
place of the attendance enhancement program, we put in ESRA, which is a support program. And we advise the employer, if you terminate one person for non-culpable or innocent absenteeism, we will drop the ESRA program. So we created some kind of peace. We also negotiated the first indoor air quality guidelines for what I know in Canada that apply to the office, to the indoor air quality For instance, and they were 1/10 of the TLVs at that time. They're now known as OELs. So for instance, if we have carbon dioxide at 800 parts per million in any building, that's an action level to get fresh air into the building, because we know that that affects our members, okay? And we also banned smoking. We banned smoking before we banned smoking in facilities. Everyone said the inmates would riot. Yeah, they gave them nicotine patches, they gave them popcorn, they gave them all kinds of things. So we banned smoking in all facilities, really due to this campaign. And there was no rioting, and but they did start smoking their nicotine patches. So what did this campaign do? It brought a higher level of awareness from our members on how to deal with indoor air quality. You know, the guidelines that we put into place, the members became aware of that, and they started applying that to their work sites so they could better represent themselves at the work site when it came to indoor air quality problems. We negotiated the indoor air quality guidelines, and members began dealing with indoor air quality issues at the workplace. In closing, I want to add one more R to the 3 rights: the right to know, the right to participate, and the right to refuse. The right to resolve is very important, okay? And that's got to be enshrined in legislation when it comes to health and safety. Thank you very much.
That's good. Those are like health and safety minutes or stories from Circle Ninja, like dog news. Okay. Bob, do you want to go next? And then Janice, and then we'll go to Brad.
Sorry I took your time, Bob.
That's great. No, Bob's got nothing to say now. Anyone knows Bob's got nothing to say. So, Bob Zorniak.
I'll take my 2 minutes. Kevin introduced the session by saying that how do you measure change? In fact, was there any change? There has been a great change in the whole mentality of workers' health and safety on the job. When I started in the steel mill, this is a plant that melted scrap steel. Every source of the military, the oil industry, the railroad, auto industry, and we had every chemical known to man. The metal containers that was melted and recycled into steel that was good for steel. That steel contained asbestos, or the metal contained asbestos, lead, benzene, lead, mercury, you name it, was there. The stuff was melted, and of course when you melt the steel, you get this tremendous amount of smoke that comes out, and it filled the shop until I actually tried it, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. People worked in that air, in that atmosphere. Temperatures of molten steel was around 3,000, 3,200 degrees Fahrenheit. They poured it, it was thinner than water. Where they rolled the steel, it was heated to 2,000 degrees, and we worked in the middle of that steel with our hands, our bodies unprotected. When they rolled the steel, these metal bars were dragged around by tongs, rolled to roll until it was reduced to a finished product. Finally, we had the first protection we got was feet, because when you go to work and gets tired, you can't work. So then they provided us with protection. That was asbestos blankets cut up and wrapped on shoes, tied on wire, asbestos bra, asbestos wrapped on legs to protect your feet. The gloves that you wore were asbestos. You put your hand out, your hands were white. You ate your lunch with that. Breathing, there was no hearing protection. There was no protection for hearing, for respiratory. And when we approached the company, the response was, what the hell do you want to do? Live forever? If you don't like it, you can quit. And that was the response. You don't dare ask, because you were a chicken and you were the story that really, I think, is really impressive is we had finally a metal building, it was steel clad, and it was lined inside for insulation. A slurry of asbestos was sprayed on the walls, with 2 inches thick walls, the ceiling. And eventually this asbestos wasn't held in place. It dried, it came down in sheets. Forklifts ran over it, totally pulverized it. You could see it in the air, floating in the air. Was floating. The workers worked with that with their bare hands. They sat on the bags of asbestos. They ate their lunch with their hands covered with asbestos. To add to that, with somebody, they used to play a lot of horseplay. And when someone went to open his mouth to shove an orange in it, someone else would pelt him with a handful of asbestos. Finally, one of the chaps developed lung cancer, asbestosis, and he died of that lung cancer. I went to work and I started investigating asbestos. And I went to every source in North America, Sanya, Lipstein, Rock, Sass, name it. And I gathered a whole bunch of information, and I finally filed a compensation claim. And this claim was a precedent in the fact that you did not have to be an asbestos worker to get any kind of recognition. This was a bystander effect. And the compensation board investigated it and they accepted it. That information was taken to the steelworkers in Ontario who used it to clean up their plants, old and steel mills in Ontario. That went to the school system where they started to clean up asbestos in the schools. And from that, it went to New York, and I don't know where it's read. It was a significant story because it was a major victory. My friends here say that I tend to exaggerate. It's not. It's written in this book. The book was written by Reasons, Ross, and Patterson. It was a sociologist, a freelance writer, and lawyer. And they approached the whole idea of accidents and mortality and morbidity in the workplace as a criminal act. This book is full of these kinds of stories, including the Tony Petrie story. When I was trying to get this shop cleaned up, the plant manager, who I got along with very well, he was a real nice chap, but he was the company manager. And, fishes and fishes and fishes and fish. And one day I worked trying to clean this up for a year and a half. The company refused. They dragged their feet. They procrastinated. Finally, I got so mad. Lunch hour, I grabbed a paper bag from Safeway before the class, and I filled that bag half full of powdered asbestos. I walked to the office, and I said to the secretary, "Is Joe in?" "Yep." Joe is the plant manager. "Is Joe in?" She says, "Yes." "Joe, there's someone here to see you." "With Bob Zornick." "Oh, send him in, send him in." Joe was sitting at his desk, working during his lunch hour. He had his lunch spread out in his lunch, his brown bag, and then he's having his lunch. "Hi, sit down." "What's happening?" I said, "I got something for you." He said, "What is it?" I took the paper bag of asbestos and I walked over to his desk and I emptied it in front of his desk. And he said, "What is that?" And I said, "That's asbestos. If it's good enough for them, it's good enough for you." He jumped up. Jumped up and started screaming, "Get it out of here, get it out of here, get it out of here." Then, and only then, cleaned up the shop. But you had to change the mentality. You had to show you're not going to take it anymore. And that is what's generally happened in this province over the period of 50, 60 years that I've involved. There is a different mentality. People don't accept these things anymore. They will not accept these anymore. And when we talk about smoking in the workplace, we used to have bag houses that were gigantic vacuum cleaners that smoke out of melt. People would go in there without protective equipment. Eventually they got protective equipment, full suits, respirators. But some of the guys still didn't believe it. And they would wear a respirator, and they would cut a hole in the respirator, stick a cigarette in there, and have a cigarette. This is the kind of thing that would happen. Now, several years, a few years ago, the company had some big celebration where they had a tent, and I forget what the occasion was, but he invited all the former plant managers and who's who in politics to this gathering. And Joe, the former plant manager, was there. And I walked up and I said, Joe, how the heck are you? He says, I'm well. He says, what are you doing now? He says, nothing. I took an early retirement, he says. He sent me down there, he put me in charge of a pipeline, drove it into a ground, and he says, I took a retirement, he says, I couldn't stand the fucking shit. So even he saw that there, he could not take it anymore. He had to look at himself in the mirror in the morning. So there has been a big change in mentality. A lot of the fights that we have are still the same fights, but they're not as hard. The precedent is set, and we just have to remind the boss that we know what that law is, we know what those regulations are, and you can't do this to them. And it's a lot different. My son is a project manager for a dental company in Edmonton. He worked at the plant. And Joe wanted to give him a preferential job, so he's not giving him a nice steady day shift, easy job. I said, no, Joe. I want him to go to university. I want him to do the same job time. I want him to smell the smoke, to stay up at night. I want him to see what life is all about. Don't give him a job, make him do the toughest, dirtiest job. And he got it for 3 summers, he did that. But now he's a project manager, so he has to do a lot of things that the company tells me, but there is a different mentality because deep inside he goes, so there has been a change in the way we think. There was a time when...
Thanks. Well, that's good. I could listen to you all day. And if there's time after, we'll come back to it. So thanks, Bob. That's brilliant. That's 5 minutes ahead in story time does.
Yeah.
Janice? Thanks, Bob.
Actually, it has changed in around a lot of the hazards that we deal with in our workplaces, and it really was thanks to 2 of my co-presenters have already talked, Dennis Malayko and Bob Zornick, who were involved in the development of the first legislation. And I'm going to talk about some recent changes respective to or related to healthcare. I have to correct Kevin, I'm not a nurse, I've never been a nurse, I work for nurses. I was a medical lab technologist. I started in 1972 as a medical lab tech assistant in Ottawa, the Ottawa General Hospital. I started off in a temporary position, and very shortly after I started, I became quite ill, but was afraid to talk to anybody about it because I was afraid of losing my job. I later found out that I had contracted hepatitis B, which was very, very prevalent, particularly in lab workers at that time. There was a number, I know in Alberta, a number of medical lab techs who died as a result of it. And it led to significant changes in the way people dealt with blood and infectious diseases related to the transfer of blood and body fluid in healthcare by bringing in what we call universal precautions. That's why all of the healthcare workers that you ever encounter will be wearing gloves. So that was a significant change, and it really involved me, started to involve me in occupational health and safety. The other passion around this other part of the story is around one of the passions I've had related to healthcare and health and safety is the whole issue of coalition building within healthcare unions. In healthcare, there has been for forever a hierarchy of levels of power within healthcare related to workers. And even today, the way the labor board determines how we are organized as healthcare workers is stratified from nurses, then we have the medical technical group, and then we have, support staff. And it definitely is a hierarchy, of course, taught by the gods of the health system, the physicians who to this day are still immune to a lot of the health and safety regulations and the rules that they have to follow. And I just want to let you know that I still carry in my wallet, and I pull it out occasionally to remind myself, which was issued to me when they discovered I had hepatitis B, so I could avoid having to get hepatitis B immunization down the road. And so I'm going to zip forward to my time in Alberta, and again, I had the pleasure of working at the Workplace Health Center, and then joined as a staff member, staff nurses, and then United Nurses of Alberta. One of the big issues, of course, remained the whole issue of blood and body fluid exposure and threats of infectious disease for healthcare workers. We had gone through the first phase. A lot of other provinces had gone further and lobbied, generally the lobbying being led by healthcare unions for what we call safety engineered sharps devices. Because needles, scalpels are some of the biggest threats for people becoming infected with infectious diseases in healthcare. So we had, as a group, had been concerned about this. There didn't seem to be any efforts from our parent unions to sort of get involved in lobbying for it. So a group of three of us activists, one of which is sitting here, Janice Malayko. Another one, unfortunately, isn't with us today, but she's still employed by Health Sciences Association, and then it's Joanne Monroe. So myself, Joanne, and Janice got together and thought that we probably should do something about this. And an opportunity arose in 2007 when the government put out a call for revisions to the Occupational Health and Safety Code. And so Janice and myself and Joanne got together and we laid out a wish list of legislative changes that we wanted to get into the legislation. We had, as this process went on, there was a working group, joint working group of representatives from workers and employers that were put together. And Joanne and I ended up on this working committee. And we ended up, the first meeting we attended, it was quite an interesting meeting. There were a very small number of individuals on this working group. It should have been 8 people in the room. We walked in and there was about 25. I looked around the room and recognized all of the occupational health and safety people from Alberta Health Services and other healthcare employers there.
So right now she's getting decent sound
We
from
did
the ceiling, but not
introductions,
her
they
mouth.
introduced
Right.
themselves,
And
but
there's no way to fix
didn't
that.
really talk
That's
about
people
where they were
are
from.
not used to using
One by one,
So what I was
I
suggesting
asked,
to
because I recognized them all, I did make a point of
I have a
asking
shotgun
them if they
microphone
were
downstairs.
working
There's a
where
guy
I
coming
knew
in to
they were
volunteer.
working. So they all had to
So I
declare
put him
that
on the
they
shotgun and
passed
we put
for
him into my mixer, which I know
We were
works
then
through.
told that not
So if we can
only
get the
were these
output of my
people
mixer
there,
into
they were
your
there apparently
wireless
as
system
technical
and connected
advisors,
into the
which
camera,
rather surprised
then
me
we should
because
be
I
able to do
knew
it.
not one of them in the room
You can go that way.
had any more technical
If you've got an
expertise than
alternative to
Joanne
that,
and I.
just
And
try.
now they would also have a vote on what legislative changes would occur. Obviously, we had taken healthcare by surprise. They were not happy about it. Joanne and I then decided that we were going to be rather disruptive after making our unhappiness with the situation known. So for the next couple of meetings, they got absolutely no work done because we just blocked every effort to talk about any kind of change to the legislation. There then was a meeting and they decided that they would not allow these individuals to attend. We ended up getting all of our wish list, but we got some significant changes. We got a requirement for healthcare workers,
Shotgun needs
for
48
employers
volts back
to
in power.
have
So I need
safety
to bring it through
engineered
this
devices
mixer.
available for all healthcare workers.
This mixer back.
We managed to legislate
If
the
you, well, okay,
requirement
you've got that
for,
right now. You have
for
wireless
healthcare
output on your Mackie.
employers to
Right, it's
provide
going to a
patient
transmitter
lifting devices,
directly.
which
All
are
I need to do
mechanical
is switch that
devices to
transmitter
lift
over
patients
to the output of
and
this
transfer
mixer.
patients.
See what we
Those,
should be able to do. It's a connector issue. Right now it's coming out
devices had
RCA.
been
This is
implemented
coming
in
out
other
XLR, so we
provinces,
need to jig that
specifically
converter.
BC, and had been proven to reduce back injury rates by up
Okay,
to
so you need to be
90% in some
an
cases.
XLR.
Also, similar
So,
statistics
female,
when BC also instituted
That'll go into the
requirement for
wireless.
safety engineered devices. We won the requirement for healthcare workers to be provided with respirators and 95 masks when dealing with patients with influenza. And of course, that was at the same time this was going on was the time that we were gearing up to the H1N1 outbreak, which luckily did not end up being as severe as SARS. So we were very pleased by this, and for me, it was an ideal situation that we worked together. We spent, I know our colleagues, Joanne and a lot of the people that were involved in this spent endless hours reviewing drafts and drafts of the legislation, and we kept pushing and pushing and pushing until we basically coerced the employer side into accepting.
bullied them, you bullied
Bullied, we bullied. I'm a bully. But we did achieve this, and there has been significant changes, just so you know that one of the downsides is although we got the legislation for patient lifting devices, the government did not provide healthcare with the money to actually buy enough of those lift devices as we needed. The same with SEDs, they did come in, they did institute it in most cases, but we still have been fighting with our employers regarding the use of safety engineered scalpels. And the reason that they're not instituting that is because the physicians are not, do not want to use them. Their rationale for not using them is that, you know, physicians are old and they are not very good at learning new techniques. And just to let you know, as a side story, that when we were at a meeting and one of the heads of the physicians group raised this as their main reason for refusing to use safety engineered scalpels. I happen to have a nurse with me, Sandy Johnson, who is a member of UNA, and she has been a nurse for 35 years. And she went up one side of him and down the other side, telling him that, you know, as a nurse, she has seen many changes and many new techniques in her 35 years of nursing. And she was never able to refuse to do it just because it was something new. Basically, this shut the physician up. But unfortunately, we did file a complaint with Occupational Health and Safety, the government agency, on this, and they refused to accept our complaint and basically told us that this was the end.
It's okay.
I'm a bully, don't you know? And that they would not interfere with the employer's relationship with the physician. So,
Well, good morning, and first of all, I want to thank you all for having me here. It really is an extreme honor to be able to speak on behalf of the professional firefighters of Alberta to you guys here today. It's very important. A couple messages that I want to share with you guys. And with the firefighters' struggle to obtain presumptive cancer legislation for firefighters here in Alberta, but it's spreading now throughout Canada and the United States. Just by way of a sort of an introduction to how we started this, back in 2001, we started lobbying our provincial governments throughout the nation to try to get these cancers covered. And we started out with, we had we're a fortunate occupation in that firefighters are probably one of the firefighting occupations, probably one of the most studied industries out there, whether it's for the advancement of materials to protect firefighters or the combustibility of different materials, whether they're wood or whether they're synthetic products and that type of thing. But it all spills out. We've got a real advantage around how that affects firefighters. But we started out by lobbying the government. One of the first things we talked to the government about was occupational disease. I don't know if all of you know, but the very first occupational disease or that has the recognition as being the first occupational disease accepted by government was, it dates back to the Industrial Revolution, and it affected chimney sweeps. And these were these young children, typically 8 years of age. They ended up with what was called soot wort, which developed into scrotum cancer, in turn affected the ureter and spread throughout the body that way and killed these individuals. Why did they use 8-year-olds back then? It was because they were small and they fit in chimneys and they were very effective at what they did. So the government back then, and this was in England, what they did was they enacted the Chimney Sweeps Act, and their idea of how to protect these workers from getting this disease was, let's not make them 8 years old anymore, let's bump the age up to 10. Years later, they bumped it up to 14. The problem that we've experienced in Alberta at that point in time is no different than today, is the enforcement component. It was very hard to enforce back then because they didn't provide sufficient amount of manpower to monitor the industries back then. That's how we broke out our lobby. In 2003, Alberta was very successful. We ended up with 7 cancers being covered under the presumptive cancer legislation with WCB. We then added 5 more cancers in 2005. We added lung cancer in non-smokers and heart legislation in 2005. In 2010, we added testicular and esophageal cancer. And I'm going to concentrate on 2010 because in late 2008, a very close friend of mine, a firefighter, his name was Al Rainbow Harris, he ended up being diagnosed with esophageal cancer. We had just begun our lobby with the provincial government, and we started, we were told that this may or may not go through because the science behind the esophageal component wasn't as strong as it was for other cancers. In conjunction with that, we had a group out there, and they're a managerial-driven research group, and they're called TriData. I don't know if you've ever heard about them, but they were hired by some American municipalities, and they were hired to refute evidence based on presumptive cancer legislation because we were gaining strength throughout Canada, but also throughout the United States. So some of these right-wing thinking cities in the United States decided to hire this TriData to do studies to refute that evidence. Going through that at a point in time, I was my close friend Al. I was working with him, and he said, "Brad, we don't have esophageal cancer in Alberta, do we?" And I said, "Al, no, we don't. Unfortunately, we don't at this point in time. But I've got this lobby with a group of us throughout Alberta. We're working in it. We were in parallel with Manitoba at that point in time. Manitoba had a great relationship with their provincial government. His name, Alex Forrest, was instrumental in getting presumptive cancer in Canada. I was working with Alex. They ended up getting esophageal cancer covered, testicular and esophageal cancer covered in Manitoba in about in the spring of 2009. Al was looking at me, he says, "So we're going to get it next, aren't we? We're going to get it next." And Al was really starting to fail at that point in time. He was no longer working on the floor. He was under constant care at home. We had applied through the WCB to get the esophageal cancer covered. WCB had denied that claim at that point in time. I had to sit down and explain to his wife and to his children as well as Al that, Al, unfortunately, you're not covered at this point in time. The esophageal cancer had spread and now became part of it. It was lung cancer. So it was getting worse. We did have lung cancer at that point in time. The problem with that, though, was the legislation is very clear that it has to be a primary site cancer. So we had limitations there. Al had passed away on June the 19th, 2010. No, sorry, 2009. And just bear in mind that date. So Al passes away. We, as a City of Edmonton Fire Department, our union approached our department and said, "We're going to get this cancer." And we asked the fire chief, we want you to recognize this as a line of duty death. And we put that pressure on the administration. The fire chief says, I'm all with for you, but I'm recognizing as well. We carried that forward back to the government, and he said, see, even our administration's recognizing it, as well as any professional department in Alberta. Manitoba has this legislation at this point in time. Don't you dare deny Al and his family the right to get that cancer covered simply because his address isn't in Manitoba. And in May of 2010, we got it. And I was very pleased to go back to that family and said, we're going back to the WCB, and we are going to ask them for a reconsideration, presented again, and WCB, I don't know where the pressure came from, and it doesn't matter to me, they ended up recognizing Al, and he ended up with coverage. In 2011, May 2011, we added 4 more cancers. Breast cancer was added, as a matter of fact. We had skin cancer, multiple myeloma, and there's one more that escapes me right now, but it's been a journey from 2003 to 2011. The last lobby we did, the government said, how many more cancers are you going to come to us with? And we said, right now, we don't have medical evidence, but as it presents itself, I expect that you extend us the same courtesy you have in the past and continue to advance causes on behalf of firefighters. Now, in 2011 as well, it was very important, because we then became we have the most comprehensive coverage in all of Canada, if not the world, for firefighters right now. But we were able to achieve one more important thing, and that was retroactivity dating back 25 years from when the first cancers came in. And I've been very fortunate to work with some of the widows of past firefighters. To date, we've got upwards of 5 accepted claims because of retroactivity and widows are now getting death benefits and funeral costs covered that they never expected. I've got 3 widows right now that were getting in excess of $80,000 from the WCB for their husbands who passed away prior to these cancer screening legislations. So, with hard work and everything, I just want to let you guys know that anything's possible, and we'll continue to work with you guys and with everyone to make sure that we all get these opportunities to have these coverages.
Yeah, ours, I'm from CEP 55 in. I work in I did work, I'm retired now, but I ended up taking a job back in the town of Hinton, so I'm now back in the CEP. And that's what I do. But I'm one of the chief, as you can call it, shit disturbers, so to speak. No is not my repertoire. I do not take no as an answer. And I'm pushy as hell. That's just something I learned. Anyhow, what my talk on is with asbestos. And maybe a lot of people don't understand what asbestos is. It's a fibrous product that has a latency period of up to 40 years. So you could be exposed today, in 40 years it'll show up. It's not a type of product where bang, you're dead, and that's it. It takes that many years in some cases, depending upon your health and whether you're a smoker or not, for this material to affect you. You can end up with asbestosis or mesothelioma and these things, and you can die from it. There's no question about it. It's a carcinogen and it is a killer. So anyhow, we're getting down to the meat and potatoes of what happened at the plant in through the 70s, there was a total lack of knowledge. Our workers, maintenance people, contractors, we impacted it. We did all kinds of silly things, like the Steelworkers, we threw it around. We did all kinds of stupid things. We were told to clean it up with shovels, haul it outside. When you go outside the plant, because of the air inflow into some of the places, the air is blown across the asbestos and it's blown up across your body when you're going outside with wheelbarrows of this material and that kind of thing. We just dumped it in piles outside, as we were told by management. I mean, we didn't know any better, and that's just what we did. In the 80s, we went through 2 expansions. And in those cases, the contractors that come in impacted asbestos. Some of them were really concerned about it, some of them left, but it really did wake us up. We recognized, yeah, it's there, okay, so what? And we just lived with it. Norm McClellan, the late Norm McClellan, and he was our rep. And he said, Eric, you got to do something about it. You can't keep doing this. And I was on the executive then. You got to do something. And we'd go through the plan, he'd point out different things. Said, well, look, we got to approach this differently. So his idea was that we need to negotiate this into our contracts, so that way we can force the company into doing something. And that's what we did. It was a tough sell, because some of our membership wouldn't buy it. They didn't understand. And of course, the company certainly didn't want it there, because then we're going to hold them to it. So we moved through things. In the 1990s, an asbestos worker started working in the plant. A local 110 person out of Edmonton who had done abatement at our site and wanted to get away from doing that work. Had enough, he said. Well, it took a little convincing from me, a few beers, this kind of thing, to convince him to help us out. I said, you know what you're looking at. Surely you can help us understand what we're doing. Point things out to us. So anyhow, we started raising asbestos issues with management. Plus, we're bringing up the awareness with our membership. And that was the key here, to wake people up. We tried to work through the OH&S scenario and the Health and Safety Committee at the plant. What I did is I stepped back from the executive, and the executive said, well, look, we're not going to waste your talents and the way you've done things through the years. We're not going to waste this. You chair the OH&S committee in the plant and go from there. Well, what I did is pushed for a separation between the Health and Safety Committee and the Environment, because they kept trying to tie the two together, and I said they're 2 separate issues. Let's keep them separate rather than deal with them. So, meanwhile, we kept putting the push on them, and they were getting frustrated. The more knowledge I got from Dave, the more we pushed. And they didn't like it. They got frustrated and everything else. Eventually they said, you guys are blowing this all out of proportion. We think that you're off track. We kept saying, no, there's these issues and stuff. But they didn't want us to do the survey. We said, no, we think we've got this in hand. We know what we're doing, and we're okay. But even though we shut down all kinds of jobs and everything else, we did that on a regular basis, chased contractors out the door because of the mess they were making. And they were getting away with this. OH&S, on the other hand, they'd come into the site, everything's fine, they'd have lunch with the company, have a little meeting with us, yeah, okay, everything's fine, away they go, back to Edmonton. We're saying, well, no, there's problems here. They wouldn't listen to us. Why would they? So what we did is we went to the OH&S, well, Dave, he was ready to give up. Well, the heck with it then. No, Dave, no. There's other things we can do here. There's got to be something else we can do to convince them that we have a problem. So we went to the OH&S site and downloaded the survey documents. Well, let's download this. Let's take this survey into the plant. Well, the company tried to stop us because they didn't want us doing it on our own time. My job in the plant at the time allowed me to travel all over to the different departments So I had latitude to go pretty well anywhere I wanted. Well, they didn't want me doing that on my regular working hours. They went, no, you're supposed to be back over at Power and Recovery, and no, you shouldn't be over here. They tried all kinds of silliness and everything else. So we continued on that way. But what we did is we went in there on our days off. And we did the survey. We looked at the different issues, done up the survey. When we were done with the survey, we went and presented it to the company. They told us, you've blown it all out of proportion. You've got it wrong. We took the different scenario and said, look at this. This is the mess we got. This is the document. That's a U1. We had pages of U1s that they needed to deal with immediately. We had U2s, U3s, we had all kinds of it, all over the place. It didn't matter where we went, we found it, right? So anyway, they said, okay, all right. So they hired PHH Environmental. And I'm not afraid to say their name. But the problem with these monitoring companies is they play the company too. Whoever's paying gets what they want, okay? We're supposed to be looking after the abatement projects, you would think, on behalf of the workers. No, we found out otherwise. It's the company who's paying. So as long as they're paying, they'll get the results that the company wants. And that's what happened. And it didn't only happen at our plant site, it happens all over the place, and it still does. So anyway, confrontations with management continued. They didn't like it, we pushed back, they pushed, we pushed back. In one of the meetings with the company, the mill nurse said, and this is a direct quote, I was there, getting asbestos is no different than getting a common cold.
Oh my.
That was the attitude. I lost it. I shoved my chair back from the table so hard it smashed up against the wall. I grabbed the table and I pinned her against the other wall with the table. And I got in her face. Dave grabbed me and dragged me out of the room and he said, you could be fired for that. And I said, let him do it. I said, just let him do it. They didn't say anything. Nothing happened over it. Guess I was lucky. Don't know. But like I said, that was the attitude. So in 97, or in that time frame, what I continued to do is do a lot of reading, a lot of studying, a lot of looking at things, going out there with Dave, looking at different asbestos products, figuring out how to look at the stuff, what we needed to do. Knowledge is power. If you know what you're dealing with, and you get a good understanding of what you're supposed to do, knowledge is power. In 1997 is when things come to a head. What we did is we had PHH, after they'd done their sampling and everything, as per the rules, they had the label. Well, that woke up the sleeping giant. The labels were everywhere. The membership went, what the hell's going on? We can't believe this. We said, we told you. We had a meeting with the executive and said, this is the mess you got. What are you going to do? Oh, we don't know. Right? Well, the giant woke up. The membership shut the plant down. They said, we don't believe you. We don't have faith in the process. We don't have faith in what the company is saying. That's it. We shut it down. The members took the matter in their own hands, and bang, we're hauled before the labor board. There we are. Oh, there we're going. Okay. Are we going to jail? A bunch of us? Well, I'm taking my toothbrush, one guy said. I ain't using somebody else's, he said. Basically, when the dust settled, the union won. The OH&S inspectors that we had on site prior to that point, they got sent somewhere else. We got new inspectors. That's never been done before. We had no say before as to who was going to inspect your site, but these ones are no longer allowed back. We got new ones. And Dave and I ended up doing the asbestos project. We ended up doing it full-time. And of course, and this is where we found out about PHH Environmental, about how they set up the projects. They weren't in our favor. They were in the company's favor. Because they were doing the things looking at the bottom line. Not health and safety wise, they were looking at it based on the dollar. Right? That's what they were doing. And it just wasn't good. So what happened is Dave and I ended up taking over the job scope writing. We took over the inspections. We took over the final inspections, the encapsulation inspections, because they couldn't be trusted to do it right. That's what we did. So we're just close to being at the end here. So anyhow, as it turns out, other locals found out we were doing this. We ended up being called, we ended up going to a few other plants in the province. We even ended up at Campbell River. And up at Campbell River, we'd done our asbestos presentation and our training. They were amazed. They just couldn't believe it. So then they said, after the presentation, this was the mill manager. He said, I want you boys to go check out this abatement project that we just had here, because I've got contractors coming in here, he said, and I want to make sure it's right. So I went back out to my vehicle and I grabbed my trusty asbestos flashlight. It's about 2.5 feet long. And then I went with it. And I said, well, yeah, the boarding went here and over there. Just followed it all over the place. And the guys goes, oh my God. We found asbestos after the abatement was supposed to have been passed into complete. He said, what am I going to do now? I said, I don't know. But I said, the bottom line, you still have asbestos here. And if you got contractors coming in, you better do something. And we found out that it was BHH Environmental that done the inspection. He said, there you go. So does that continue on today? You bet. It's still there. Program, I'm no longer at the plant, but the program has been scaled back, the company clawed it all back, and everything else. But there's still problems there. You can't tell me it isn't in other work sites across this province. It is. Another real eye-opener for me was when I got invited to this conference in Ottawa. And when I looked at the faces of people where Canada is selling their asbestos product, people all over the world, and the look in their faces. That was a horror story in itself. And we still do this today. Good old Ford Motor Company opened Cassiar because they wanted to build lighter vehicles with the magnesium. Guess what they're doing with the asbestos? They're selling it. Good old Ford Motor Company. And this is how they treat this product. It's a serious problem, and we really have to look at it seriously. Thanks.
Thank you so much, all of you. I mean, it's the passion and the fight, I guess, it's so rich, right? Did you want to, I don't want to spam people in lunch, it's never a good thing, but we had, do you want to make some comments on James said you were going to, so hey.
Sure, I can.
We'll close it up with that.
Introduce yourself.
And introduce yourself, because I'm bad at that. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Janice Peterson. I'm here, I guess, to speak about youth organizing, youth, I suppose. I came here actually mostly on behalf of the Next Up program, which is a youth leadership program based around environmental and social justice. I spent the last couple of days thinking about health and safety and thinking about what I could say. And honestly, most of the workplaces that I've worked in, I'm fortunate to say that I've had really excellent experiences dealing with health and safety, that issues have been addressed fully and succinctly. Many complaints were dealt with, at least in my experience. And I think I personally owe a huge debt of gratitude to people like this who have spent decades and decades organizing to keep workplaces safe and make them safer places for everybody. But in general, I think conferences like this are, obviously great places to ask questions like, whose voices aren't being heard, who's not present, and we've already heard at the plenary speaker and questions asking where are the youths today, where are they organizing, why aren't they coming out, what are they doing, how can we organize the youth, how can we make them active. I think that's a pretty misguided notion that youth are not involving themselves, especially in labor and unions. I think it's just being done in different ways, and I'd like to give some examples, and it's kind of interesting because a lot of the stories that I was hearing from the storytellers, I could relate and give examples of projects and campaigns that I've been a part of that are doing things very similarly in different ways and maybe much smaller scale, but creating change and doing things that are so similar, working to make workplaces free of sexism, racism, homophobia, ableism, classism, all of these isms that are still so present because we still work within a capitalist system. We still allow businesses and these corporations to take control of these workplaces. And I think a big part of it is trying to work within ourselves and work to decolonize ourselves and decapitalize our minds and all these things to allow ourselves to organize and empower one another. And that's what I feel like youth are doing today. And it's becoming a lot easier to do so, and it may become easier as time goes on. Mass information exchanges and communications from across the world are everyday things. Students in Quebec are learning from students in Chile, who are learning from students in Egypt, who are learning from students in Syria, and there's all this information exchange going on and creating a much stronger and smaller world. But I think that even though it's not as concentrated and maybe not as evident and maybe not as revolutionary as what a lot of these organizers and workers have done in the past, but I think on a small scale that things are really flourishing, maybe behind the scenes, but yeah, I think things are going really well. Yeah, I'm willing to speak more about these things too if anybody has any questions, but that was really all that I wanted to say.
Thanks a lot.
Just an answer to your comments. There are a lot of, what we did was also very small things. It sounds like major listen to us, but it was really just small things, very much like what the youth are doing now, and we need to continue to do that. There's a couple of big battles we haven't won in Alberta, and we need to continue to fight those. So one is we still do not have the requirement for joint health and safety committees in this province. We still have a culture where Workers are blamed for every injury or illness that occurs. And lastly, we have a culture and a government that does not believe in enforcement, but rather in compliance strategy. And this whole attitude has to change. Just so you know, one of the other hats I wear is as a worker representative on the Ministers' Council on OH&S, and they are next year bringing in ticketing for workers, which they have no problem enforcing rules on workers, but we're also in discussion, and there's going to be some public forums coming up next week on administrative penalties for employers. And the employers are fighting this hard and fast because the culture out there is that enforcement doesn't work. It seems to work for workers, but it doesn't work for employers. So I really encourage people to attend those forums if they are invited, and to ensure that the enforcement is equal. Enforcement is important, but we can't have just workers being paying the price of that.
Just 30 seconds. About 30 years ago, at a conference, Bob Sass, who is a leading specialist in health and safety, he brought in the whole concept of the 3 R's: right to refuse, the right to
Know and participate, and now right to resolve.
yes. But we have to, he says, you have to keep in mind, he says, I believed in that. He said, I always believed that knowledge was power. He says, I found that different, because politics comes into it.
Power is
It's always politics. He says, you know what power is? Power is power.
Now it's corruption, collusion, and what the 3 C's.
So you can see how this
Can I
goes.
just say one word on the asbestos? I'll take 90 seconds.
Sure.
Listen, the workers didn't know, but the bloody industry did know. In the 50s and 60s and 70s, they planted ships, schools, hospitals, mills, and mines. The asbestos industry knew that it was fatal and hid it from the workers, and that's a crime, and they all should go to jail for it. And our government continues to allow the export of asbestos to Canada. And it's shameful. It isn't that we didn't know. We did know, we just refused to be given the knowledge.
By the way, they do more than allow the export of asbestos. They actually put pressure on countries to accept asbestos. Denying them trade, they won't take our asbestos.
Exactly.
The other thing that bothers me is a lot of these workers were carrying it home, and their spouses and their kids have asbestosis. In Quebec, there's stories of that, yeah. Did you have a comment? I interrupted somebody.
It's fine. I can sit here all day. That's great.
But I agree with Janice. That was a small campaign I started that blossomed. So no matter how small, just, if you've got an idea, outside the box idea, go for it and watch it blossom, okay? And build your networks. That's critical. We had some great networks when I started out, and you gotta keep in contact with each other on campaigns. This coalition stuff is pretty good. We've got Bill 1 now on post-traumatic stress disorder, and we've got some members that suffer the same, so we like to form coalitions as well with that coming down the pipe.
Anyone else?
Thanks, guys. It was excellent.
Thank you, everyone.